Hello, my name is Amy Jenkins, and I am here with
Angela Irvin.
together. We are going to have a Reader's Advisory Mental Health Edition. As you know, Angie, that mental health is such an important topic, and having different materials to recommend to people that are trying to understand or explain different kind of concepts is really important. So one of the things that we are doing, because you and I are both part of this wonderful health and wellness team, is to put forward presentations to assist customers in regards to this. Now, we'll put a preface out there to all of you who are listening to this video that it's impossible to capture all the wonderful books out there from birth to age 120 in regards to mental health. Mental health can be anything from exploring a person's emotions. It could be stories that have elements of mental health in them. It can be works of nonfiction that go into the details of, for example, anxiety or bipolar disorder. It could also branch into other books that are self-help related. So there's so many books out there that this is just a small sampling of what Angie and I found. So we hope that you will enjoy this presentation. So Angie, we talked about this, and we were talking about starting in some kind of order and looking at our smallest customers and seeing what kind of books that we have out there for our smallest customers. Did you find anything?
So I tried to pull on books that I use with my kids, and I have a almost 5-year-old and an almost 10-year-old. So I tend to go towards picture books because those are things that tend to explain heavier subject matter in a way that makes it more relatable and easier to digest, if you will, because it's explained in a way that makes it almost humorous for some. It depends. And I found a couple that it really touched my heart. And there's one that's called The Kissing Hand. And, and that one was great. And it is something that I've actually done with my daughter and kissed her hand and put it on her cheek. And for anyone who's not very familiar with the Kissing Hand book, I can give a brief synopsis. So school is starting in the forest, but Chester Raccoon does not want to go. To help ease Chester's fears, Mrs. Raccoon shares a family secret called the Kissing Hand to give him the reassurance of her love anytime his world feels a little scary. Now, this book was originally published in 1993, and the message is still very prevalent. It's something that helps the child just kind of pull onto it. They put their hand on their cheek and they feel the warmth of the kiss. So that's one of my favorites, absolute favorites.
That was on my list too. That was definitely something that I'm like, that's a classic. You have to choose that one. Well, I'm going to go and recommend something that's a little bit for even smaller crowd. I found a book called Homemade Love by Bell Hooks. And what I thought that was really nice about this book, besides its gorgeous illustrations, was it talking about the love between a parent and child. And that in there, that they know that that life happens, but there's an element where she makes a mistake. And they talk about how, as a family, they have forgiveness.
Aww.
So it talks about family love and forgiveness, and
that's beautiful.
To be kind. And so I thought, when I was looking for our young crew, that this would be definitely a book that you can put into the hands of fostering this, even from. Most of these are geared towards, a lot of 2s and 3s, 1s, 2s and 3s. And I think to lay a foundation, as soon as they're able to pick up concepts, would be really, really good. So this was one of my choices.
That's wonderful. And that's such an excellent message to try and deliver at such a young age. It's very, very important. The next one I picked, and it does happen to be a picture book as well, but it's called Playing Possum. And it is such an amazing book. So it talks about this adorable little possum who has a little bit of trouble with anxiety. He gets a little nervous, he gets a little scared, and when he gets scared, he plays dead. And that's his coping mechanism. And he discovers a friend who has the same coping mechanism, but it's an armadillo. And so when she gets nervous, she curls up in her tight little ball. And that's how she processes what's going on. Now, what the story is really kind of reaching at is that they came together to communicate with each other in a way that eased their fear. They eased their anxiety, and they became the best of friends. And through kindness, love, and respect, they learned to communicate with other animals that shared the same fear, to make sure that they were all shown the same level of respect, same level of understanding. And it was just such a beautiful book. It's recommended for preschool to grade 3, ages 3 to 7. But honestly, I find it helpful for any age because it helps make it completely okay if you're feeling nervous, that there's probably someone else who is as well. And you guys can work together and find a common ground to make each other feel good.
Oh, that's so sweet. My next recommendation, I don't have a cover of the book, but I was on the phone with my friend in Missouri, and she found a book in her library, and I looked in our catalog, and we have it. It's called Invisible Boy by Trudy Ludwig. It's about this little boy named Brian who feels invisible. But when, and so his drawing, the illustration, he's kind of like gray and kind of not like a bold color, but when he goes to this new school, but when he meets another student, Justin, he feels like everything changes, that he's not being bullied and he's not alone. So you see his body morph into this brightly colored figure. So it deals with being anxious, being in a new school setting, and a nice visual progression of acceptance amongst his new peers. So I thought that was particularly, relevant, with a lot of children experiencing social anxiety and bullying, and being, it's okay being yourself. So I thought this one was kind of a good mechanism to help broach those topics.
And I think that's a great segue into my next recommendation. Like, that's perfect. It's called Breathe With Me. And it's a series of breathing exercises for children to help them work through anything that makes them feel anxious or uncomfortable. And I love it because it gives you specific exercises you can do, and it's got beautiful illustrations that you can see. And it's delivered in a way to help the child feel strong, calm, and happy. And it's beautiful. I loved it. I read every single exercise to my kids, and they really enjoyed it. And I think it's incredibly important for us to be able to share different types of ways to cope with anxiety, and especially during the climate that everyone's facing right now.
Well, that's really important. It kind of goes into one of my books. And my book was called What is in Your Mind Today, by Louise Bladden. And so what was really nice about this, it's talking about children who struggle with negative thoughts and how to make them go away. So it gives guided illustrations and meditations for kids. It offers simple mindfulness practices to banish thoughts. And it's such a very rich book. Like, take a deep breath in and out. It goes, can you feel the air rushing through your nose? And it's just a beautiful, practical tools. I think a lot of times is that people are looking for tools. Like, they have this experience, you're kind of explaining to them, but then what can what can a parent do or a teacher do to help help the child kind of work through these difficult situations. So I'm kind of feeding off of that with you and going towards this kind of book.
Mm-hmm. And I love it. And that I found another one that's helpful for two, Yoga for Kids. And I loved this one because it provided great illustrations of the stretches and very detailed instructions on how to follow it. And for me, I'm not very good with yoga. I'll be the first to admit that. But this is the first book that I was able to follow very wonderfully. And it helps guide you through with the breathing, and it just helps bring you to a very relaxed place. And it's something that, again, it's yoga for kids. So it's very delivered in a simplistic way so that everyone can enjoy it and everyone can get into it.
That's really good. That's really important. And I think it's okay not to stereotype people into that you can't enjoy a book if it's in children's because you're an adult. If it's something that's going to break it down and it's digestible to you, well, there shouldn't be a bias as to, what you find applicable for yourself or for someone else. I was also pilfering our branch library shelves to see what can I pull from the branch, and I found a book called I'm Sad, and it deals with it's kind of funny because it deals with the flamingo and a potato and a girl. And so basically, they go around and say, I'm sad. And, well, why are you sad? Is it okay to be sad? Sometimes if I'm sad, I feel I will eat an ice cream cone. Or example, if I'm sad, like the potato likes to roll in dirt. So they talk about their individual emotions of feeling sad, that it's okay to feel sad, and sometimes you can make things feel better, and then maybe tomorrow will be a different day. So I has a little elements of humor in it if you like talking potatoes. So I think this is just a great one to kind of introduce with motions and saying however you're feeling, it's okay. So you can have this emotion and it's fine. And offering, little baby suggestions of, sharing what makes me not feel sad anymore. So this is one I picked up, and it's a very cute title.
It is. I think that looks adorable. And it's one of those where a lot of children can tend to pull on the covers. They're drawn to certain animals or colors, and that's one that would draw me because of the little pink flamingo who looks so sad. Let's find out why she's sad, and I think that's incredibly important to acknowledge that it's okay to feel those feelings, and it doesn't matter what age you are. I think that's incredibly important to acknowledge that children do have these feelings. They do have these things that they experience. It's not just an adult thing. It's not anything like that. So I find it incredibly helpful that these materials are available now, and they're putting it in a way that children can relate to. I love it. The next one I found is called Violet Shrink. This one was great for me because I could relate to it. When I was a child, I definitely did not like going to parties or family gatherings or anything like that. It made me feel uncomfortable. And Violet does not feel comfortable going to big parties. And so her dad has cleverly disguised the word party as a get-together, as a tea party, as anything to get her to go to these things, these functions. And Violet becomes she gets a headache, she gets a little bit of a tummy ache, and she finds comfort in hiding under kitchen tables or hiding at the top of a stairwell. And her dad doesn't really understand why. And so towards the end of the book, she asks her dad to please put your listening face on and listen to me so that I can tell you what's going on. And I thought it was incredibly important that the book highlighted that the parents need to pause and really listen to what's going on. And the illustrations are just really great, and it's just very forthright and honest with how her face kind of changes when the anxiety sets in a little bit. And I just thought it was really helpful to shed a light on the fact that we need to be open and listen and respect what the child feels.
You make a very good point, Angie. It is important because it's a process. You need somebody to speak to you who is going to listen to you and have that kind of an outlet. So it's not like a one-sided problem or challenge. It becomes, you know, a larger picture, to be honest with how you're feeling and reaching out so that people do hear you.
Mm-hmm.
So that's very important. Well, there's a classic title that I absolutely adore, and I watched it on YouTube again earlier today. But I know you know this one, Angie. Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Bad Day by Judith Bjorst.
Yes.
It's a classic book if you ever thought about any book. And what it really highlights, my dog is whapping at me, sorry. What it really highlights is that, you know, his day is like the absolutely worst. He gets gum in his hair, his siblings get a toy out of their cereal box, they get window seats and he's stuck in the middle. His mom forgets to pack his dessert. So everything that could go wrong with his day goes wrong. And realizing that, you know, sometimes the day can give you lemons. You know, you don't, everything, things can go wrong, but the more important message is that it's just the day. And that every day begins a very fresh page where you're on a clean slate. So I know about you, Angie, if I've had absolutely horrible, no good, bad days myself. And I can empathize with our young Alexander, but to know that every day is not going to be exact copy of the day before gives a message of hope. Mm-hmm. And understanding that somebody else, whether that's this character, has experienced, you know, that kind of situation, to know that things can get better.
Absolutely. And I think that's incredibly important, especially with books that we're trying to deliver to children. And because it is very easy to lose hope. And especially when you're living in that moment of that absolutely horrible, no good, bad day, it's really easy to say, well, I'm done. Let's just check out. But it's very important to say that, you know, the sun will rise tomorrow, that it's going to be a new day and it's going to be okay. We just got to take a breath. For sure.
Breathing is important.
It really is. Reading helps a lot. And speaking of doggies, that leads to my next one, Anxious Charlie.
Aww.
So this one is really adorable. This is a little doggie who describes his life as absolutely run by rituals, that he has to go a certain path around this tree, that he has to follow this certain series of events or his day is just going to be horrible, that it's going to lead to bad luck, that it's going to lead to something just catastrophic happening. And what ends up happening is that one of his little animal friends ends up having an emergency, and that requires Charlie to just act. He is not able to follow any of his rituals. He has to go help this friend in need. And in doing that, he realizes that the world didn't come to an end. He was able to help his friend. He was able to resume some of his tasks that he likes to do, but the unfortunate event did not occur because he didn't walk around the tree a certain way. That is just something that happened as a part of that day. So I just thought it was a nice way to kind of describe anxiety in a way that was relatable, and that it's okay, that it's, if you have these specific set of rituals, that's fine, but it's not going to, we have to try and rise up against that negativity that it is going to be detrimental if we don't do X, Y, and Z. And the illustrations were just adorable. The doggy was so cute.
That's awesome. That's really awesome. I think exploring books that have so many potential of topics to span so much of mental health. There's really rich literature out there. And, you know, I find that inspiring to know that, you know, these kinds of books are out there, and even books that, you know, but beyond dealing with sad, angry, but, you know, going into other topics, anxiety, like you say, it's great that they are able to provide this kind of resources today. Well, I have one last one. Well, actually, I have two more of this category. It was hard for me to choose. So I was trying to look for when Sophie got angry, but our branch didn't have it. So I had When Sophie Thinks She Can't. And it's by Molly Bang, who's a very classic author. So basically what this deals with is Sophie feels like her siblings could put the like a mathematical puzzle or shape puzzle together. And she feels, you know, because she couldn't do it, it's an I can't attitude, like I can't. And so Sophie goes to school and they're dealing with some kind of math problem and she's nervous because she feels she can't do math. And I could empathize because I felt like I couldn't do math. But what she finds in this is that there's more than one way to get to an answer that the teacher is looking for, and that each person had a different way, but they all got the same answer. So instead of thinking, she says, I can't, now she says, well, I can do this. So it's talking, you know, it's encouraging self-esteem to say that, let me try this. You know, I can do this, to have a positive attitude when you encounter, you know, a problem and you feel like you can't, like that person does it better, or, you know, you don't even want to try. So I thought this was a really nice book, helps build self-esteem to realize that we can do things if we work hard and we try.
That's wonderful. I love that message. I think that's incredibly important, especially when it comes to areas like math or reading, and there's a lot of pressure specifically around those two subjects. And so being able to communicate that we all get to the same thing that's wonderful. I love that. I have one more. It's called The Beach is Loud. And so this is a coping mechanism book specifically discussing this young man who has autism. And his father takes him to the beach, and quickly he becomes overwhelmed by the sounds, by the textures, everything. It's just too much. And it discusses a very beautiful interaction between his father and himself, and they focus on each other and they work through a coping mechanism to get him centered and to get him in a much more calm place. And eventually he's able to enjoy the beach. His father created this nice little tent for him, so it was just him. He didn't have any sand in any area, so he didn't have to worry about that texture coming into play. And it was just beautiful because for me, it communicated in a way that made it very real, and it made it very practical that this is what happens. It quickly becomes overwhelming, and we have to be able to understand that he needed that space. He needed that time to try and be able to come to a more calm place, and the father was just wonderful in his response. And it makes me think of how the other people at the beach would react and how they would understand the situation, and perhaps this would be helpful for those that don't have an autistic child and would help them to understand what's occurring in that situation.
That's a very good point. Educating others, I think, is, you know, children have questions, children are inquisitive, they see things. So what better way is to expose children to a variety of books, to a variety of situations. It helps spread awareness and looking at an empathy that we're all different and it's okay. We can all be different. We can have our different things, but we're people, we're humans. And I think that is important. I have one last book in this category, and you know what it is, Angie. If you're happy and you know it. Now, as we were talking about, this is by Jane Cabrera, and there's so many good ones that go along with this, but we use it frequently in the story time. But, you know, one of the things, if you're happy and you know it, spin around. So it's talking, you know, it's okay to express happiness, that all emotions do not have to be negative. And it's something to celebrate positive emotions. And children love this one because you can create any variation and create your own movements of being happy. So happiness is and also it's a great emotion to celebrate and to be able to express yourself. So I thought this would be my last one to kind of promote a different part of the perspective of this.
That's wonderful. I love it. And I think that's a wonderful way to cap out that particular category. I think that's great. And it's wonderful. We have to remember to celebrate the happy times too.
Exactly. It's really, really important. So we've shifted from our youngest crew. And if we move up the next ladder, the next age group is juveniles. And so I'm going to let you start off with the first one that you recommend for juveniles.
So for the juvenile fiction, one of the particular ones, and I was not able to secure it within my branch, but it's called Grandfather and the Moon. And that's an award winner. And it's part sort of like a graphic novel, but then also more reading like a juvenile fiction book. And it discusses the grandfather losing his wife and the difficulty he's facing after that, and sort of the shift in her grandfather, in his mentality and how he is moving through the life, but it's more so just kind of moving through the motions. And her trying to give him hope, trying to give him positive things to hold on to. And it delivers the message of loss in a way that isn't as heavy, if you will, and it shows it from different perspectives. I thought it was very interesting. The illustrations were very nice. I was taken aback by the fact that it was sort of graphic novel, but then also an actual fiction delivery of the material, but I liked it. I thought it was really great.
That's great. And I like the way that there's the subtle message in there, and the you know, gradual shift. I think you know, that's an important message. I tended to lean towards this category of juveniles. My first book I picked out was Too Shy by Claire Freeland. And it's a what to do when you feel. So I'm sure that this, you know, they have more books in this particular series. But it talks about kids being shy and kids being not liking the spotlight on them. And it's really good because it talks about principles of social anxiety, and it gives resources for educating, motivating, and empowering kids. And you know, one of the things it says here is what to do when you start feeling shy. And it says make a list of times that you feel shy. For example, you're shy when you go over to a sleepover to somebody's house, or the teacher tells you to stand up and give a presentation, and you have to stand up in front of all of your classmates. That it's okay to be uncomfortable. And it really breaks it down into bite-sized content that juveniles can work with. It's definitely something that's very appropriate, but there are a lot of kids that are shy. I was shy as a kid. Now I'm not shy, but it's a really important thing. So I think this is a great resource for teachers, for children, and for adults.
I think that's great.
That was my pick.
I love that. I think that's great. I only had one other, and it's more of an EFB, so it's for, it says suggested kindergarten through grade 2, ages 4 to 8 years old, but it really kind of just depends. But it has beautiful graphics, and it's called Benny and Penny, How to Say Goodbye. And this is very interesting for me. It discusses the loss of a pet, and it specifically discusses how two siblings react very differently to this loss. And the one sibling, Penny, she is heartbroken. She's so sad. And her brother is not so sad. He reacts in sort of a negative way. That, at least that's the perception. He reacts very angry. He reacts very hostile towards the loss of the pet, because he said he never liked the pet. The pet was just nasty and stole his food and all that. But what ends up happening is Penny seeks solace with her friend, and the whole time that Penny is preparing for the burial of the pet, the brother, Benny, is hiding. He's witnessing everything Penny's doing because he wants to inadvertently be a part of it, but he doesn't want to actually show that he's sad. So it was very interesting. At the very end, Penny catches Benny, trying not to twist my words here. Penny catches Benny crying. And he finally admits that he was sad, that it was something that hurt him, but he didn't know how to show it. And it was just really nice to show how two different people can grieve in their own way and can come together at the end and reach towards a common communication.
And that's a really important topic, is death and loss. It's a very, very difficult conversation to have. And anything that can be used as a vehicle to help assist with that is invaluable. Loss of a pet, and then you go into further loss of a loved one. I find that a very difficult topic to try to broach with children. So I think that's a great representation of a resource that if you were going to have this kind of conversation, to kind of help pave the way in regards to that. And if you saw a preview of my dog, Joy, she's having social anxiety because Mama is sitting on the computer, just to let you know, audience. So I have another book, and Angie, this goes in line with what you were talking about with the younger crew, but it's called Calm, Mindfulness for Kids. And what I really liked about this particular book was the illustration. So one of the suggestions in this book was to make a glitter jar, so that if you are experiencing anxiety, you can shake and watch the glitter fall down to the bottom of the jar. And all you needed was a jar, water, and glitter, and you can put it together and just watch it fall as a way of just letting things settle. It's full of very practical advice of another thing of being out in nature, taking a nature walk, of how to tense and relax your muscles, and to exercise, to stretch. It's just very beautiful. It's accessible, it's practical, and it's from DK Books. So I just think that it's just a wonderful, wonderful resource to have. And like you, Angie, when you enjoyed the other book of doing yoga, I am a huge fan of trying techniques in here, and I want to make my own glitter jar. I'm inspired now to make one of those for myself. So practical tips. So that's really, really, really important.
That sounds amazing. And I'm going to say I want to make my own glitter jar now too.
Excellent. Excellent.
It sounds like so much fun. And I feel like you could have like different varieties, different colors. It could just be a whole thing. That sounds like an amazing thing to do.
It sounds like fuel for another future program.
It does. I think so.
I can see some things happening with us. So we're bridging now from juvenile and we're moving up another level and talking about teenagers or young adults and the types of materials that are out there. As we know, adolescence is a very tough time. You know, there's areas of growth. The brain, as we know, the brain is still developing. Hormones are flowing. So there's a lot of different factors happening in adolescent life. And I can start off with one. It wasn't on our list, Angie, but I saw it at the branch and I actually read this one, and it's called Dumplin. Dumplin is by Julie Murphy, and it's about this girl who is given the name Dumplin because of her body not being stereotypically thin, blonde, blue-eyed, and beautiful. And so she gets a job in a fast food restaurant and sets out to build up her confidence. So she enters a beauty pageant.
No.
And she decides that she's going to go all in to be in this beauty pageant. And what I like about this book is I think it highlights self-confidence and loving yourself the way that you are, that you don't have to do anything because you're valuable as you are. And I think there's a lot of comparisons that social media, you know, helps influence. Not with just teenagers, but with everybody, that you have to be this and that. And this just says be yourself. So I thought that this would give like a positive message. And this is a work of fiction. So this is a fictional story that kind of brings this topic out. So this is my first teen one.
That's great. One of the biggest things, the differences that I noticed is that you jump from juvenile to teen, and in that jump comes a very big difference in the subject matter and how it's delivered.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the teen books go into great detail when it comes to depression, suicidal ideations, eating disorders. It's it's delivered in a way that's a bit more explicit, and so it can be more relatable, hopefully, within that age gap, so that they can seek that help or that assistance in delivering that information in a way that's more relatable. I have nonfiction and I have fiction. Now, the fiction one I was not able to secure at my branch.
Oh.
But it's called Highly Illogical Behavior, and it discusses agoraphobia and panic attacks. By John Corey Whaley. As part of a plan to get into college, Lisa Prater wants to free her former classmate Solomon Reed of his debilitating agoraphobia, but it's obviously not as simple as that. As Publishers Weekly explains, this is a lighter take on the topic of mental health. Prince Award winner Whaley tackles heavy, heady topics with a light touch, populating his perceptive and quick-witted story with endearing, believably flawed teens. So it's delivered in a way that makes it relatable, digestible, but not so heavy that it might be a little bit too much to take in at once. And that was one of the top ones. And I thought that discussing, especially agoraphobia and panic attacks, is incredibly important. And it's something that I don't feel like gets enough attention, and something that should be taken seriously.
I know, Angie, I am I would say, unfortunately, very familiar with that topic myself. I've had panic attacks before, and it's a very scary experience because I know at one point I thought I was dying, that something terrible was happening to me. I didn't understand, and the more, if you are versed in this area, the more you react to the symptoms, the worse they get. And so it's really important to have a broad spectrum of it covering like every possible mental health aspect to make it reachable and relatable, that it's out there. I think you bring a very good point of the different types of content, because there is a huge jump, like you said, in content and detail and description that you would not necessarily want your juvenile to read. potentially. But I think that is an important topic, and to be able to highlight different materials to show that this, as we said in the beginning, this just is a glossing over of the types of materials that are out there. So once again, you know, for any kind of viewer, you can look into our catalog and look at the variety of materials that are available. You can also check out our e-resources. We also have some professional journals, and we have some crafting things that can help with this mental health process in general. So you bring up some very good points, and I'm happy that you actually highlighted agoraphobia and panic attacks, because it puts it out there and people can say, oh, and so I think that's in there. I think knowledge is power, and I think that's the kind of the message that we're sharing here, is that, you know, we have all these materials that are available for the public. So thank you for sharing that important topic. I have two books. I'm going to kind of do them together because I think they kind of relate. This is the Resilience Workbook for Teens, and this one is the Stress Survival Guide for Teens. And this book here is a December 2019 release, so it's relatively new. It talks about cognitive behavioral therapy, of how to worry less, how to develop grit, and how to live your best life. And I pulled out something here. It was talking about going with the flow and expressing gratitude. So, you know, just following something along and saying what you're thankful for. So it's just an example of something that is tangible. Lots of suggestions, lots of questions, lots of solutions, and how to put other things together, very practical. And this one over here, the Resilience, it's like workbook. So there are activities in here that you can do, and there's charts in here that you can do. So if you got a copy for yourself and you're like me, you can mark all over it. But this is the library copy, and of course we can't do that with the library copy. But one of these things in here is to turn I can't into, turn a what if into I can. How often do, you know, we experience that? Well, what if I give a speech and I pass out? And, you know, those are kinds of fears that, you know, people could have. So it's teaching techniques on how to do that. And then I highlighted one more of talking about different kinds of self-care. And I think that's really important, is taking care of yourself. So play an instrument, dance, take a martial art, or create your own self-care. What kind of tools do you want to try to self-care, and see whether or not that helps you or not?
I think those are wonderful. And you know what I love the most about those two titles is that it's validating the fact that teens feel stress. Mm-hmm. That they feel overwhelmed. They feel so many different emotions, because often there's this misperception that teens just don't feel the same thing as adults do, or that you have to hit a certain age to fully understand what stress is. And that's just not true at all. That, you know, and so it's very important to highlight materials that validate those feelings, and it gives great tools for them. So I love it. I think those are great. And one of the biggest thing I hope through all of these discussions is that we can help take down the stigma around mental health, and the fact that it needs to be discussed more. These resources need to be shared. And that kind of leads me into my next book.
Oh, great.
And it's called Life Inside My Mind. So this is actually a nonfiction teen title, and it's a compilation from all young adult authors, including Ellen Hopkins, Maureen Johnson, and they recount their own personal experience of mental illness. It's a raw, real, and powerful collection of essays that explores everything from ADD to PTSD. And being that it's sort of in a short story type of format, because these are essays and they're shared from all of these wonderful authors right here. And it puts a perspective on it that maybe your favorite author has had some challenges with their own mental health, and now you can read about it and you can relate to it. And being able to relate to it takes down that stigma, and you're able to talk about it and share your story, and that helps bring a more bigger understanding of mental health as a whole.
Well, Angie, I'm glad you said that, because now I'm going to bounce off of you. Because I found a title called Don't Call Me Crazy. It's 30 plus voices that start conversations about mental health by Kelly Jensen. And it is available electronically through Overdrive. So if you want to download it to your e-reader, you know, it's accessible in that format, but it's the same thing. It's starting conversations about mental health. It's estimated like 1 in 5 people in the United States have a mental health condition. And it's not something that people should be embarrassed about and hide themselves from, because as I had my discussion with Stacy Smith of NAMI of Prince George's, that people are people regardless. And I did talk about how people understand cancer and people understand heart disease, but when you say, if you're talking about mental illness, then, you know, people have very defined ideas of what mental illness is, and mental illness is an umbrella. Mm-hmm. And umbrellas can cover a whole variety of things. So we say like anxiety is part of it, bipolar is part of it, schizophrenia is part of it. But it doesn't make a person any less valuable. It's just a medical condition. It's a disease. And I think you're right, in the biggest battle, like we said in 2020, even though we've come a long way, we haven't come far enough, because there's still a stigma of anybody wanting to share that they have a mental illness. And I think by having book discussions like this and having other educational lectures or other kind of content, moves the topic a little bit forward in the agenda, and sharing the message that, you know, you're okay, that there's other people that are in your same kind of situation, you're not alone, and that there is hope. So I think all of those are really important messages, and I hope between you and I that we're doing a little something to kind of put this topic forward. So that was another title that I was spinning off of your title. Did you have any other books in this particular category?
So there are many for the teens that I love, but I think we could probably have a whole reader's advisory on each age group by itself. Mm-hmm. But there is another one that is called, and I don't have it here, but it's called Hold Still. And it does discuss suicide, and it discusses bereavement with regards to that. A brief synopsis is Gail Forman wrote of this novel, Hold Still may be the truest depiction of the aching, gaping hole left in the wake of a suicide that I've ever read. A haunting and hopeful book about loss, love, and redemption. So it's a different take on it in showing the after effects of something that might occur as a result of mental illness. And suicide as its own has a horrible stigma around it. And I think it's incredibly important that we try and share resources that discuss this in a way that takes that down just a little bit and from all perspectives. And that's why I found this one particularly interesting, because it shares the perspective of the other side of someone who is grieving that loss. Mm-hmm.
Well, that's very good, an interesting title. So one of the titles that it's a 2020 release. It's a nonfiction book called Hidden Valley Road, and it's talking about inside the mind of the American family. So there's this family, the Gavin family, who are living what we think of as the American dream. They have a large family of 12 children, and they are working with kind of like upward mobility. But what it fails to realize is that behind that wonderful exterior presented to society, that the interior isn't as happy, that there's violence and there's abuse and psychological trauma. So what this book talks about is how 6 out of the 10 brothers ended up with schizophrenia. And that, which is a highly unusual situation. And it talks about this family's genetics were being studied and even is used today at NIH to talk about genetic aspects of schizophrenia. People are scared of the word schizophrenia, and if we look at the mental health scale, schizophrenia is probably the most severe form of mental illness that you can have. But I just think that looking, at the genetics, the genetic composition of this just brings an interesting perspective in the potential spread of mental illness and genetic component passing down from generation to generation, and also talking about trauma and the impact of trauma in a person's life. So this is a brand new 2020 release. We do own it, and I think there's a small wait list currently for this. So I know I'm going to put myself on this list because I'm curious to read the details.
I've put myself on the list too. So that was one of my books. Like, I have it on there. I'm going to read it.
You're ahead of me then. You're ahead of me on the list. No fair. No fair.
So does that mean we're transitioning more towards adult?
I think we're going to transition into adults.
Okay. So one of my all-time favorite books, and this is a big one, so it's not a quick read. It's called I Know This Much Is True by Wally Lamb. So I'm a huge fan of him anyway, because he writes a lot of fiction material that discusses mental illness. What I particularly enjoyed about this, now disclaimer, I do know that there's an HBO series on this show as well, or on this book, and Mark Ruffalo did win an Emmy on this show, but if you could read the book first, that'd be great. The book depicts a set of twins, and one has schizophrenia, one does not. And it covers their entire life. And what I really appreciate is the raw information given on the brother who has schizophrenia, but then also discussing the trauma and the pain that the brother who does not have schizophrenia faces while taking care of his twin. And I don't think that there's much discussion on the caregiver side of mental illness, and this book talks about both sides. It talks about his own trauma that he's facing while trying to save his brother and trying to take care of him. And again, I do acknowledge it's a very long book, but it's one that I got through very quickly because I thought it was just shared in a way that you almost don't think that it's fiction. And it's just, I appreciate that, because one of the big things for me when I started reading fiction materials on mental illness is that more often than not, unfortunately, mental illness is depicted in a very negative light. It's depicted in a way that increases the stigma because it makes schizophrenics automatically labeled as murderous people who are going to cause havoc and they have to be locked away, and that's unfortunate. And so I had to take a step back and just realize that a lot of this is a work of fiction and it doesn't necessarily speak for the entire community. And so once I did that, I was able to enjoy a lot more material.
That's a very good point, a very good perspective of, two brothers dealing with two different aspects of it. There is being a caregiver in general for someone, regardless of if it's mental health or for some other physiological reason, is difficult and stressful. So it's interesting to hear about the other perspective involved when a person or family members is dealing with someone with a mental illness. It's sometimes they don't understand and they don't have the skills to cope. So I think that highlights something very important. I have a title, Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman. This is a very quirky book. It's funny, it's touching, it's unpredictable, it can be kind of dark. Eleanor becomes this like wonderful character. So basically it's, Eleanor is dealing with different social skills and tends to say exactly, she doesn't really have a filter. Things just come out, and it talks about how it is, to be lonely and have a kind of insular life. And she just has lots of anxieties and has been living like a really limited life. And, Eleanor has mental illness, and she has a couple situations in the book that deals with the anxious situations or ramifications of behaviors or things that happen in the book. I think this is another a good venue into, or portal into, not getting too heavily involved in the particular science of mental illness, but illustrates in this that a reader could identify that, oh yeah, I've had kind of a similar experience. But once again, it's saying I'm not alone in this kind of situation. Did you read this one, Angie?
I did, yes.
What did you think of this one?
I liked it. I thought it was good. I like how, again, a lot of these books, what helps me is that it helps you not feel so alone. It helps you relate to it in a way that you're like, oh, okay. And I liked it. And it wasn't as heavy, as I know this much is true, which was appreciated, because that was a bit of a heavier read as far as the content and what was occurring between the brothers. So I appreciated the change of pace.
And it had a lot of humor in it too. So it wasn't like a completely dark book. It just was a very humanistic slice, of a character's life. And so I like that aspect of it. And I love how immensely relatable it was. I had time just to pick up one more book, and there's so many, but I found this on our shelf called Find the Good. This is by Heather Lende, Lende. It's under the self-help section, because a lot of the books can be helpful under self-help. So this lady is an obituary writer in a small town, and what she does is, when she's researching a person, she goes deep into their history and has the most pleasant obituaries, discovering different nuggets about the person's life. And I like the aspect of finding the good. It's such a positive thing to do, is to look for the good sometimes when there's a lot of negativity around us. So it's not a very long book. It's a very quick read, but it's an interesting intake. It's an interesting perspective on of trying to look for the positive, and especially in a topic like death and investigating, researching people's life, is to come out with this wonderful kernels about a person's existence. So I think finding the good could translate into everybody's life, of maybe keeping positive affirmations or positive things every day that you experience. So this is the one that I chose to highlight.
I love that. I think it's a wonderful title. It's such a wonderful way to discuss and sort of wrap up sort of a darker topic, is to focus on the good and find the good I love that. So one of my last few, and I thought this was particularly interesting. This is called Psychiatric Tales, 11 Graphic Stories About Mental Illness. Now, it's an adult graphic novel, and that's what I particularly liked. So it makes it very digestible. And this is written by someone who actually worked in a mental health hospital. And so he's sharing the stories about his patients in a way that takes that stigma out of the picture. And he wants to make them more human. He's sharing the human side to everything and making it more relatable. Here's the other side of schizophrenia. Here's the other side of bipolar. And I just thought it was really refreshing because it was a way of showing it in a positive light and taking away that stigma a bit more.
What I like about that feature that you chose, Angie, is that the format of it being a graphic novel, because people have different points of digestibility and access and processing different information. I think sometimes having that as a different format makes it easier for some people to relate to. So I think that's, just a very, very important way of communicating, not just traditional print, just print material. So it's nice to see that translating into graphic form.
Absolutely. No, it's wonderful. And these are all books that you can get at our local library.
Yes, and plenty more. Let me tell you, plenty more.
Yes, ma'am.
So at this point, Angie, do you have one last book to conclude with?
I think that was going to be my highlight one.
That was
the Psychiatric Tales. Yes, that's going to be my highlight one because it's a graphic novel, and I think it's just a wonderful way to highlight the different topics we've discussed.
And there is one more. It's called Marbles. It's a graphic novel that deals with bipolar disorder. And it, like I said, the title is Marbles. And I actually read that one too, but it is presented in graphic novel format. And I was curious about the format, so I found it digestible. And I think because we need to meet a variety of people's needs and learning styles, and whether they're watching a video or listening to a recorded book or a picture book, or they're going into the graphic novels, the more that we can get this message spread on as many platforms as we can, it just makes it easier to communicate the message that it's okay, that mental health is this huge topic, and there's a variety of tools that the library provides that users can experience. So I think that's really important. Well, I'm sad to say, Angie, that our time for our discussion has ended for now. I wanted to thank you for being part of this discussion with me, and I want to thank all the listeners and viewers out there for being part of this Reader's Advisory. And please check out all of our resources on our website, www.pgcmls.info. Take care and have a great day.